What is this political belief system which we call liberal? Well, in political discussions in modern times, that word liberal is being misused. It suffers from what I refer to as an anti-definition. In other words, the definition that's assumed when we use the word liberal today is the antithesis of its original correct meaning. So imagine with a political system, we can break it into two parts: the ethical side and the economic side. When we talk about economics and use the word liberal today, economically speaking, we are using it to mean people or policies which promote socialism, big activist government, heavy central planning, and that sort of thing. But that's the absolute antithesis of what liberal originally meant. On the ethics side, the word has maintained much of its original definition. In word, if not in deed. The liberal political idea is basically an outgrowth of the Enlightenment. The ideas go back as far as the late 17th century, but it became really formalized in the middle of the 19th century, or in the Industrial Age. So what do liberals actually believe? Well, liberals primarily believe that all human beings have rights. We all have the same rights, and lots of them. And those rights are very important. Nobody should violate anybody else's human rights, including government. Government must not violate human rights. Its only purpose is to protect them. Liberals believe in freedom. Liberals believe that we are naturally free, and we have a right to be free as possible. The maximum amount of human freedom possible is the liberal ideal. So liberals believe in freedom of the market, for example. Liberals are capitalists, and also using that term by its correct and accurate definition, not by the anti-definitions that are used in modern times. Liberals are not socialists. As I mentioned, the liberal idea goes back to the Enlightenment period, and its basic ideas were hashed out by some very superb thinkers. There are many of them, but I'd like to talk about three in particular: John Locke, Frederick Bastiat, and John Stuart Mill. At the end of the 17th century, an Englishman by the name of John Locke wrote some of the seminal philosophical works of our times, and works which originated the basic principles of what would become liberalism. These were his first and second treatise on government. Now, in these books, John Locke wrote arguments against tyrannical rule. England was ruled very tyrannically by its royal government in the late 17th century, as most of Europe was. And Locke was dead against the ideas that rule was by divine right or that rule was by hereditary right. And in these two treatises on government, and particularly in the second treatise, Locke put out arguments against that. And in the second treatise in particular, Locke made many very good arguments that human beings are naturally free, and that we ought to be free all the time. That government only rules by the consent of the governed. The only reason anyone has a right to govern somebody else, or rule over somebody else, is if the governed gives them consent to do so. And then, the only legitimate role of a government is to protect people, and protect them from violence in particular, from force, internally or externally, that is. Protect people from criminals, or protect people from foreign invaders who want to do them harm. That's it. That's the only legitimate role of government, and only by the consent of the governed, per John Locke. John Locke wrote much about human rights, property rights, and other rights. He was one of the first proponents of women's equality and the rights of children, something we're still behind on today. Now, much later on, middle of the 19th century, a French politician by the name of Frederick Bastiat wrote another seminal work called The Law. He was a prolific writer, actually, but The Law was an important work. And he wrote and published this book in 1848, at the peak of a period which a lot of historians refer to as the Second French Revolution. This was a time when many progressive thinkers, like Frederick Bastiat, were rising up in strong opposition to the authoritarian establishment regime that ruled France at that time. And so he was one of the early liberals in a way too. He was more like an anarchist by our standards of the day. In The Law, he wrote that laws are an inherently bad thing. Because no matter what the law, no matter how good the intentions, a law can only ultimately have the effect of reducing the amount of human freedom and liberty in the world. It can never increase it. In this way, he sort of parts ways from later liberals who do believe in government and do believe that government is important for enhancing freedom to a point. Now, shortly after Frederick Bastiat in England, a man named John Stuart Mill wrote what I think is the Bible of the liberal philosophy, if I can put it that way, a book called On Liberty. John Stuart Mill was the son of another famous prolific author on human rights, James Mill, the economist. John Stuart Mill was a member of Parliament for a short time in the 1860s, and one of the co-founders of the first political party of that name in Europe, the Liberal Party in Great Britain, which became a very powerful party. John Stuart Mill and his fellows were progressives who were opposed to the regime that ruled England at the time, which was very authoritarian, strong central government, very much the antithesis of liberal principles. And these people popularized the belief that human beings should have the maximum liberty possible and the maximum individual freedoms possible. In this seminal work on liberty, John Stuart Mill laid out the cardinal principles of liberalism. Human beings have many rights, and they're universal rights. They're universal to all human beings. John Stuart Mill was one of the first major opponents of slavery and wrote work which was seminal in ending slavery. He was also one of the first strong proponents of women's equality, women's right to vote, women's right to work, women's right to be equal in every way, and for children too. So John Stuart Mill's On Liberty was a seminal work that basically wrote the treatise on the liberal movement. Now, although America is not really a liberal nation today, the American Revolution and the French Revolution were some of the earliest products and also beginnings of liberalism. Someone, I don't remember who, it might have been Rousseau, but someone said that Americans are all Republicans and all Democrats, philosophically. The philosophies that started our nation. Well, America's a liberal nation too. All Americans are liberals. And to this day, really, most of us believe in maximum human freedom. We believe in equality and human rights and freedom. And America has fought for that worldwide. Now, some of you may be confused about the term libertarian too. What's the difference between that term, that modern term, libertarian, and the word liberal? Well, libertarian is more of a broader umbrella term, which includes what we call classical liberal. I don't like the term classical liberal because liberal is the original term. If you're talking about classical liberal, why hyphenate it? Hyphenate modern liberalism and call it what it is, socialism or Marxist liberal or something like that. But liberal means what it originally meant. So back to libertarianism. Libertarian is a broader umbrella term that includes liberals and also anarchists and anyone who believes strongly in maximum human freedom, with or without government. So libertarians include people who don't believe that we should have any government at all, which separates them from liberals. So liberal means maximum freedom, freedom of the market, human rights of all kinds, and that government's only role, its only limiting role, is to protect its citizens and their freedoms and their rights 100%. So how did we get to this anti-definition for the word liberal that we have today? Well, basically, there was more than one movement which was progressively opposed to the tyrannical regimes that ruled in the 19th century. The other philosophical stream of note was Marxism and socialism. Marxism and socialism were not that popular at the end of the 19th century. They were gaining in popularity. Liberalism was very popular. So they were political opponents, although they were both opposed to the status quo. So, Marxists, socialists, sort of hijacked the term and they did it like this. Since they were both the opposition to the establishment, They made that the definition of the word liberal. They popularized that as a new definition for the word liberal, so they could call themselves liberal. And so now, after that was popularized, liberal has come to mean anti-establishment, but also socialist, Marxist, strong central government, the opposite of its original meaning. I think we need a liberal party in America today. I wish there was a John Stuart Mill alive today with American citizenship who could lead us in creating that new party based on the original American principles of liberty, maximum freedom, market freedom, human rights, equal rights, with minimal government intervention in our lives.